Hi, you're listening to The Sociology Show, a podcast about absolutely anything to do with the wonderful world of sociology. Whether you're a teacher, a lecturer, a student, or just taking a passing interest, this podcast will look at a range of issues from social class, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, religion, crime, education, and anything else that sociology has to offer. My name is Matthew Wilkin, and each episode I will speak to someone working in the field of sociology and let them explain all about their own interests, their research, and their experiences. So, put your earphones in, turn the volume up, and let's be sociology geeks together, eh? Hello and welcome to The Sociology Show. The Sociology Show podcast is brought to you in association with Tutor2U Sociology, the exam performance specialist for A-level and GCSE sociology students and teachers. And so you can visit their website, which is tutor2u.net/sociology. And there you can pick up revision guides, flashcards, revision videos, and everything else that you need for your A-level or GCSE sociology studies. And so my guest for this episode is someone a little bit different. He isn't a sociologist, but he does have a significant impact on the sociological thinkers and the sociological world. He's the comedian, journalist, and political satirist Andrew Doyle. Now, if you've not heard the name Andrew Doyle, then you may have heard of some of his fictional characters. He's the co-creator of Jonathan Pie, and he is the man behind the ultra-woke Titania McGrath on Twitter. As Titania, he's released 2 books, Woke, A Guide to Social Justice, and my first little book of intersectional activism. His most recent book, Free Speech and Why It Matters, is recorded under his real name, Andrew Doyle, and explores why free speech is so important and so fundamental to a well-run and functional society. So without further ado, let's go over to the interview. Hi, Andrew. Thank you very much for joining me on the show.
Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you. I always start, Andrew, by asking people to say a little bit about who they are and what they do. And I'm hoping most people listening probably do know a little bit about you. But if they don't, do you mind giving a brief intro?
Sure. They probably don't know. I'm a stand-up comedian by career, but I also write comedy things and satire. I created a character called Titania McGrath, which is a satirical account on Twitter to satirize a certain type of Twitter user, but she's also published a couple of books, and we've had a live show, and we're doing that live show again later this year, probably in September now, it looks like. But I have a background in teaching, I have a background in academia. I've also written plays for the stage and for Radio 4. I've written a number of musical adaptations of things like Huckleberry Finn, Gulliver's Travels, and Terry Pratchett's soul music and other things like that. That's my CV basically, but I know it's quite boring when people rattle off what they've done. But you know, I write as well. The other thing I do is political and cultural commentary, either through Spiked Online or Spectator or various other publications. Whoever will have me, basically, I'm not fussed about the platform.
Brilliant. And you might be wondering why the Sociology Show. Have you done any sociology before yourself, or have you been involved in sociology?
No, it's absolutely not my area of expertise. So, you know, if you want to ask me about sociology, you're going to be massively disappointed, mate.
Well, I did bring you on for a good reason, because even though you may not have a background in sociology yourself, I think a lot of your work is very much connected to the sociological world. Would you agree?
Well, that's fair enough. I mean, look, when I was doing my doctorate in Renaissance literature, I was exploring a lot of the postmodern theorists and the post-structuralists who sort of really did dominate Renaissance studies at the time, and particularly because my thesis was relating to gender and sexuality. So obviously it naturally lends itself to Foucauldian theory and queer theory and that kind of thing. So all of those things, I imagine, have an overlap with sociology, but I don't know how much in the weeds of that you want to get particularly.
Right. And I might ask you a little bit later, once we've explored a bit more about your view about where sociology is at the moment, with good reason.
Well, again, I'm really not qualified to say, but I'll have a stab.
Well, okay. I'll bring that point back up later, because there's a reason I wanted to ask you about that.
Okay, cool.
But let's start with Titania then. So you've already mentioned Titania McGrath. Would it be fair to say that Titania is a parody account mocking contemporary woke culture? Would that be a fair description?
Yes, I think that's exactly right. That's exactly what it is, yeah.
And it's almost 3 years old now, isn't it, Titania?
Yeah, so when it would have been April 2018, maybe. I think that's when I set the account up. And, the first book was in March 2019. So it was about a year after the account was set up. And then the second book was last August, I think, something like that. So, it's now getting on a bit, isn't it? I suppose. Yeah. But the trouble with it is that, I never like doing things for too long. I always get bored and I want to move on to something else. The problem is she's more relevant now than she was when I started. And when I started, of course, I had all this pent up enthusiasm, which I no longer have. I'm quite jaded now. But actually, there's far more relevance for the character than there was before, particularly with the explosion of the culture war last year. And there's more call for her. So actually, in a sense, that will be good for the live tour, because we were going to do the live tour last March and then it got postponed to this March. Now it's been postponed to September. And actually, I'm looking forward to that. That will re-energize it for me, because I'm going to rewrite. We did the live show in Edinburgh 2019, but so much has happened that I'm going to rewrite the whole thing. And that's quite exciting to me, because I think we have a lot more challenges now to face, a lot of different challenges to face within the culture war. And certainly the type of person that Titania is satirizing has become more aggressive, more vicious. They've become more sort of intransigent in their tactics. That actually, that's quite good for a character like Titania, because she can really let rip now, and people will believe it. At the time when I first did the character, people were saying to me, "Oh, but no one's really like that, are they?" I tell you what, no one ever says that to me now, because the evidence is just too widespread. And I just don't really get that criticism anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at a couple of your tweets over the last couple of days, and still the first few comments are, "Is this real? Is this satire?"
Yeah.
So still 3 years on, I think people are still baffled by whether this could potentially be a real poster.
Isn't that weird? I mean, it never ceases to amaze me that. But yeah, there's always someone out there who hasn't heard of her. The world's a big place. She's only got 600,000 followers, so there's a lot of people out there who can take the bait, and often do. And what I really like about that, when I do get into these arguments with these people on Twitter, is that they're often from the other side of the political spectrum. They're often from the right, often, and that means that I'm able to mock the fact that they've fallen for it through the character. And that's another target that it's not just that I'm mocking the social justice left. I can also mock them as well, and that's quite good for me, because I like to there's all sides of the political spectrum are worthy of ridicule. There are excesses in all areas, and I don't like to limit myself to just the one thing.
I was going to ask you, actually, in terms of the responses, which ones worry you or scare you the most? Is it the people that get angry with you for what you've posted, or the people that agree and retweet it?
Well, it's both, isn't it? I mean, either is a bit worrying. I do feel a bit sorry, actually, sometimes when people think she's real and get into arguments with her. And I often try and signal as much as I can, this isn't real. And I'm willing them to clock, But look, I just think it is depressing. It's particularly depressing when the things that I say as Titania, someone then says in earnest about 6 months later.
Yeah.
And I did one last year about, speaking and writing English is an act of colonial violence. And then quite a prominent teacher who'd actually done a TED talk, he put out a tweet saying, I think teaching English is an act of racist violence. And I just thought, I said that as a joke, and now you're saying it for real. And it does upset me, actually, that kind of thing, because it just means I don't want to be right all the time about this stuff. I don't. The most extreme things I can imagine tend to come true, and I don't want them to come true. I'd love all this sort of stuff to just go away. The sad truth is that there isn't anything that I could come up with so ridiculous that it won't eventually be said in earnest by someone from that ideology.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps that's why it's so popular, because it just sits on the borderline of this could be true. Someone could be posting this.
Potentially, and yeah, I mean, sometimes I've even just cut and paste existing tweets by some of the more extreme ones, and that in itself is quite a fun thing to do.
Yeah, one of the ones you put, can I just read one out? Because I thought you posted this in December 2019, and I've since seen things similar to it. So you put, as Titania, Santa is a symbol of white patriarchy. He enters the home, brackets womb, via the chimney, brackets vaginal canal, to deposit his gifts, brackets sperm. Santa is a rapist. Now, quite clearly, I would have thought people seen that as a joke, but subsequently, I've seen posts about Santa being this patriarchal.
Have you actually? Oh,
yeah.
But well, I'll have to add that to my list then. Yeah, I haven't seen that one. I mean, but then again, it's not surprising, is it? You can theorize anything into existence. You can even say that Santa Claus is an oppressive patriarchal figure who effectively endorses rape symbolically. You can do that if you want to do that, but of course it is nonsense. But so what? We just had Dr. Seuss books banned. The estate of Dr. Seuss saying they're no longer going to publish 6 of his books, and of course this is insane. The man was born in 1904. It isn't really too much of a leap of the imagination to understand why he didn't necessarily reflect the values of 21st century intersectionalists. And you would have thought that actually the easier thing to do in those situations, we've had this before with Enid Blyton, for instance, is to teach children and explain to them that ethical standards change over time, not to just erase things that we now find problematic, because there are things today that in another 100 years' time will be equally problematic, and probably, in fact, most of the literature of the woke movement. But it's very myopic, this idea that we just purge the past of anything that troubles us now. The key point is things change. I mean, it's banal, isn't it? I'm sorry, you know that.
Yeah, but there's also a problem of, I hate to use the word cancel culture, but pretending history hasn't happened. Surely the thing is to learn from it and develop from it rather than pretend these things didn't occur.
It's astonishing to me, when you have people republishing Huckleberry Finn, as they have done, without the use of racial epithets, and in fact schools removing copies of Huckleberry Finn. If you remove the racial epithets from Huckleberry Finn, it is effectively sanitizing history. It's effectively saying things are not as bad as they were. It's actually doing the reverse of what you should be doing. You should be drawing attention to the injustices of the past, not pretending that they didn't exist at all. And and particularly with something like Huckleberry Finn, which is a satire. The satire of that book works because the self-righteous adults, the churchgoers, they're the ones who nonetheless, in spite of all their Christian moralizing and posturing, think that slavery is somehow acceptable. And it takes a child and the innocence of a child to see the injustice of that. And that's the point of the book. And the idea that you should sanitize that. You completely make it toothless. You get rid of that satirical effect. It is an unambiguously anti-racist book, but by censoring it in that way, you're taking away that very anti-racist message that we should be upholding.
But is that the kind of problem then? Because people might see a particular word, and then assume that the text or the film or so on is racist because the word's in it, but they're not looking behind the context of why it's there.
That's just an inability to engage with art on its own terms. It's a misunderstanding of what artistic representation is. It's absolutely nonsense. It's like when whichever channel it was deleted the episode of Fawlty Towers with the Germans. There was the character of the Major in that episode used a racial slur. And as John Cleese had to explain, I mean, he must be going mad having to explain his jokes, but he explained that he put that word into the mouth of that character because that character is an old relic. We are laughing at the character for using this offensive term. Not, that's the point. But this literal-minded approach, which is, he said that term, therefore we need to delete the episode. It's so backwards. It's completely misunderstanding the point. If you can't represent anything that is morally ambiguous as an artist, you're not really an artist at all. So much of our great art explores the darker side of human nature, and some of the greatest characters that have ever been created are morally ambiguous characters. That's if all art is a vehicle for you to express the ethical trends of any given time period, then it's frankly useless.
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you an example, Andrew. So I might not include this, but just going off topic. I'm a teacher, A-level teacher, and every year I give my students some films to watch, which I think would be good for sociology. And one year I had a complaint that a student had said that I'd encouraged them to watch a racist film. I panicked. I worried. So I went back through the list. Going, which one is it? Which one is it? And it turned out the film was American History X.
Okay. Which is an anti-racist film.
Which is an anti-racist film, but of course it's about a guy who has racist values who's depicted. And I found that really confusing that the student had assumed that I'd encouraged them to watch something racist when the film was the complete opposite.
You won't find a racist film that was made over the last 30 years. You will find films that have depicted acts of racism. And the idea that people can't tell the difference between those two positions is really depressing because it means they haven't been properly educated.
So that brings me back on. Do you remember I said I wanted to hear your position on sociology as a subject? The reason I said that is a lot of what you write about is about wokeism or cancel culture or pronouns or shutting down free speech. And a lot of people would say those things are coming out of sociology departments in the US and the UK. Do you think that's true? Do you know?
It's interesting because a lot of the people who I find quite infantile on Twitter, I look at their bio and they say Professor of Sociology, and I think, oh, what's going on here? There's a lot of the people who are actually, frankly, incapable of argument and don't understand what free speech means, and are quite sort of they like to bully people online. I've noticed this correlation between that and being academics in the field of sociology, and I don't know why that might be. It's really funny when I was talking to Helen Pluckrose about this, and the example she gave, she said, it's really dispiriting when you see someone ranting on Twitter and you think either this is a 12-year-old whose parents need to take his Twitter account away, or it's a professor of sociology. Now, I don't know why your field attracts those with an infantile mindset. Now, that's not to suggest that people in the field necessarily have that. I'm just saying there seems to be a preponderance of those kind of ideologues within that field. You are much better placed than me to tell me why that might be.
Well, first of all, we've probably pissed off a lot of my listenership, but anyway,
I'm only observing what I see.
No,
it is by no means a slur on sociologists or the field. I was speaking to a very lovely sociologist just before the lockdown at this gathering I was at. It is by no means. I am just saying that there is a notable correlation. It does appear to attract the more zealous ideological types, and I don't know why. That's all.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've given it a lot of thought myself is I think if you work in the field of sociology, there are certain narratives you're expected to follow. You know, the vast majority of sociology teachers are sympathetic towards feminism and Marxism. They're probably anti-Tory, anti-Brexit. So I just wonder if there is kind of a trope that needs to be followed if you work within that field. And I'm not sure if that makes sense.
Well, I think it's probably more of a problem with academia more broadly. In fact, there isn't much of diversity of political viewpoint within academia anymore, and study after study has demonstrated this. But you'll be able to tell me, I mean, surely if you are anti-Brexit, anti-Tory, to what extent really should those political values come into the classroom? That's true.
Whether people can avoid instilling personal opinion within their teaching, I'm not sure. It's quite difficult to remain objective, would you say?
It absolutely is, and I have sympathy for that. I often failed in that myself when I was a teacher. Is that your instinct? You've got a captive audience. Your instinct is to proselytize and to tell them what to think. But it's an instinct worth resisting. And I think if particularly if you're serious about academia, and particularly when it comes to the woke ideology, which is skews people's perceptions of reality. So therefore, I think it's particularly important to be on your guard against that. And again, let's emphasize this. I think there are a lot of sociologists who I'm sure don't allow their political prejudices to impact their teaching and make an effort to retain objectivity to the extent that is possible. And let's be fair, Twitter does amplify the most marginal, obnoxious voices. So it is a complete unfair representation of sociology that I have advanced to you today, and I will therefore apologise for that. But I do not take back anything I've said, because what I have said is observably true.
No, I agree. And actually, I mean, this was a question that I wanted to pose to you, because taking the Titania effect, if you like, when someone does post a tweet which is overtly woke, attempting to be woke, what do you think that person's trying to achieve when they do that?
I never like to assume what is going on in someone's head, because I know that that's absolutely impossible. You never really know someone's full intention. So the best thing to do is allow them to explain their own intention. In other words, I'm a great believer in taking people at face value and believing that they mean what they say. So I think a lot of the woke people who are saying these things really do think quite genuinely that what they're saying is they are doing a moral good. I do take people at face value. I'm sure it is the case, because there's so much power wrapped up in the woke movement. It's a very powerful position to be in, that actually there will be those who are seeking power and seeking to consolidate their power. And there's, let's face it, an instinct in humankind to enjoy the suffering of others, to enjoy Schadenfreude. The bullying aspect is quite natural to an awful lot of people, and I think a lot of those people quite naturally gravitate towards the woke movement because this gives you a forum within which you can bully and attack people, but you can still say you're virtuous and on the side of the angels. I think it gives you a great cover for those who do have this malevolent instinct, and I think that's why you get a disproportionate number of bullies in the woke movement. But what I would say is a lot of people, a lot of the people who describe themselves as woke that I've spoken to are coming from a place of sincerity. They believe in these power structures that they've concocted in their minds. They believe that there are fascists around every corner, and they want to solve that. And that's a noble thing. You know, if I thought that there were Nazis everywhere, I would be wanting to do something about that. And so I do have sympathy with that. And imagine that the weight that must be on your mind. You know, if you genuinely think that neo-Nazism is on the rise and that there are Nazis everywhere and there's more Nazis today than there were in Nazi Germany, I'd be terrified. I'd be permanently terrified. So, you know, I do have sympathy with them, but I think they're deluded.
You kind of just touched on it a little bit there, but I've noticed a lot of posts, huge number of posts, and that you kind of parody this through Titania as well. It's kind of this anti-whiteness.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, well, I just wonder where that started and what's behind that as well.
Well, I mean, it's at the heart of it is critical race theory and this rehabilitated racialized thinking, which is really essential to the social justice movement, which is that it's akin to a kind of original sin narrative that you know. I mean, we've seen if you want to look at examples of this, Christopher Rufo, who is a filmmaker in America, who is sort of the go-to person for people who want to leak information, woke policy that's being implemented in schools and universities. And he will show you document after document, reams and reams, where schools are segregating parents by race for parents' evening, for instance, segregating children according to race, telling white children that they are inherently racist by dint of the colour of their skin, and that America is fundamentally a white supremacist country, and that every interaction, every potential human interaction has racism at its core, which of course is the thesis of White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. And those books and ideas and critical race theory, in fact, which is so rooted in America and its history of slavery, it has been imported uncritically into British schools, I'm talking even primary schools, but also, of course, generally universities as well. So at the heart of that is this mistrust of whiteness, and that's why you get things like the Resisting Whiteness conference at Edinburgh University, where in fact, you know, they will say that whiteness is not actually related to skin colour because people of colour can enact whiteness. You know, they often talk about enacting whiteness. In other words, people of colour who don't agree with them. But it was funny because at this conference, they said that people could only ask questions in the Q&A after if they were ethnic minority people. I don't know where that leaves a mixed race person. Are they allowed to ask half a question, maybe, or can they whisper their question? How does that work? So at the same time, you see, it's full of contradictions. Either whiteness is a power structure that permeates society, or it is to do with skin color, and you're saying white people can't talk in the Q&A. You know, it's one or the other, but they like to think that it's both, depending on the context.
And in that respect, I've got to ask you about the Coca-Cola thing this week.
Yeah, so Coca-Cola, and you'll notice that the signature on that, so I should explain, there were some leaked images of a presentation given at Coca-Cola in which the employees were berated for being white, and the takeaway from the session was, try to be less white. And of course, and if you look at the signature of those slides, guess who the guest academic was? It was Robin DiAngelo, because Robin DiAngelo gets paid $12,000 for every session to come into corporations and spout her nonsense and tell white employees how racist they all are. So it's not something that should be taken seriously. But of course, major corporations and governmental departments are pushing this stuff, and that's it's based on nothing. It's widely discredited. It's just incredible to me that these niche ideas are just. I mean, it is a religion. It is totally a religion. It's not grounded in data, and any data that disproves anything that Robin DiAngelo says, she just happily ignores.
I've heard you mention that before. I think it might have been on your interview by Joe Rogan, that it's almost becomes like cult-like behaviour.
It does. Well, if you are not interested in reality, if your fundamental belief system is that truth itself is a construct, and that you need, you're not going to take it on board when the data disproves your point of view. Like, one of the things about being an adult is an acknowledgement that we could always be wrong, and then we go into these discussions, we go into arguments, because if we're proven wrong about something, we should celebrate it. We should have some humility. It's a good thing because it means you're edging closer towards the truth. But this movement does not believe it can possibly be wrong. The most frightening thing, I think, about woke activists is that their chilling sense of self-certainty. It's never occurred to them that they could be wrong. And when they are confronted with data and elements of reality that do disprove their position, they just deny reality, which is what a child does. And this is what I see it as a kind of infantile, mindset, which has somehow managed to penetrate higher education. It's really sad.
And actually just probably making the problem worse, actually, is it? Because you're just stirring up racial hatred, actually, aren't you?
Well, I mean, this is the end effect of critical race theory is racial segregation, and it makes society more racist, not less. We have a proven track record of what is effective against racism, and that is social liberalism and standing up against racism as and when it occurs, not where you imagine it occurs. And the thing is, and we know it works because look at the progress that has been made since the 1960s. Huge progress. I'm not saying that it's perfect. I'm not saying we've eliminated racism. It still exists, and we still need to be vigilant against it and stand up against it. But critical race theory is the very worst thing. If you wanted to concoct a theory to make society as racist and divided as possible, you couldn't do much worse than critical race theory.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for The Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.
That kind of brings us on to where I wanted to go next, because I want to talk about your new book, Free Speech and Why It Matters. So it's just recently come out. How's it gone so far? Good?
Great. I'm very, very happy with the book, and I'm very, very happy with the people who've got in touch having read the book. And I'm particularly pleased, which is my intention, because I didn't want to write, because I'm not a culture warrior. I'm someone who criticizes the culture war because I want to see it come to an end. And I've done that satirically through Titania McGrath, but through my articles and now this book, I'm attempting to engage with it. And I'm attempting to reach out to free speech skeptics, because I will talk to anyone who disagrees with me as long as it's done in a polite way. I'm not interested in big rows. I'm not a confrontational person. I don't want anyone who's just going to throw insults. I'm not interested in that. I'll just block people like that. That's what I do on Twitter. I'm not interested in talking to children. I want to talk to the adults. So I've addressed the book to free speech skeptics, really. And I've been very gratified that people have got in touch and said that they have modified their view, or they are rethinking certain aspects, because most people are somewhere in the middle. You've got the sort of the free speech absolutists on the one side, and you've got free speech skeptics on the other who just are hostile to free speech, and that I include in that this social justice ideology. But in between, those who are not participants in the culture war, it's the vast majority of people who, broadly speaking, do agree with free speech, but also have come to the conclusion that hate speech laws are a good thing, that incitement to violence is more commonplace than it is, and who have bought into this lie that there is a kind of zero-sum relationship between freedom of speech and minority rights, and actually the two are in conflict. And one of the things that I really try to emphasize in the book is that conflict is illusory, and in fact the only way to guarantee minority rights is through the defense of free speech. It's no coincidence that the countries throughout the world where free speech protections are meagre is precisely where minority rights are at risk.
I think one of the important parts of the book is just defining exactly what free speech is, because it's massive misconceptions as to what free speech actually means, isn't there?
It's funny to me, like all these people that whenever I do block people who are abusive online, or most importantly, if they mischaracterize my view and refuse to take what I'm saying in good faith. In other words, they will say, I don't believe what you're saying. You secretly want to be racist and homophobic. I'm not going to talk to someone like that, because there's absolutely no point. They've already decided, and got it very wrong, by the way, but they've already decided what I think, and it's actually the opposite of what I actually think. And that's not someone you can talk to, because that's not someone who's capable of argumentation. So I will block someone like that. And then we saw the other week all these academics complaining that I blocked them. Well, I blocked you because you're an infant, right? And the thing is, that's my right. And they were saying that this was a threat to their free speech. which is weird because by saying it's a threat to their free speech, they were demonstrating that it absolutely wasn't a threat to their free speech, and their free speech has been in no way affected. I've been blocked by hundreds of people on Twitter, and at no point has my free speech been impacted by any of it. And it's such a weird fundamental misunderstanding of what free speech means. The freedom not to listen, it's absolutely essential. The freedom to walk away. If someone walks up to me on the street and says, "Oh, you're an ugly Nazi," I'm not obliged to stand there and listen to what they've got to say. I will walk away. That's my right. And everyone knows this. Like, even a 10-year-old could tell you this. It's just weird to hear prominent figures in the media even claiming that I am in some way, in any way, in a position to harm their free speech. I don't have that power. What are they talking about? Have I deleted their account? I can't delete. If I could delete their account, if I could see them thrown in prison for the things that they said, then yes, they would have a point. Otherwise, I'm just exercising my own freedom to block them on Twitter, and they have to grow up.
I suppose the problem is, isn't it, that a lot of people have the misconception that free speech means you can say whatever you want without repercussions, but that's not.
I don't know anyone who thinks that. Okay. I don't know anyone who thinks that. Can you name me a single person who actually says, freedom of speech means that I should be able to say whatever I want and no one else should be allowed to rebut me or criticise me? Can you name one person who's ever said that?
Oh. Or is that the fear, though, Andrew? Is that the fear that some people worry that if you give people free speech, you're allowed to shout racist comments in the street? Is that what the worry is?
Well, that's a slightly different thing. I was talking about the straw man when people say, "Oh, free speech defenders are just saying that they want free speech without consequences." Literally, no one's ever said it. It's just a complete straw man fabrication. No one has ever made that claim. So we need to move beyond that for one thing. The other question about not wanting racists to shout their horrible words in the street, well, I have immense sympathy for that. I would love to live in a world where racism didn't exist, in fact. I don't want to hear that sort of thing. And if I do hear that sort of thing, I will remove myself from the situation, or I will challenge it if I feel that I am able to do so, in a position to do so, that isn't going to cause physical harm. So, but the question then is, it isn't about defending the substance of that speech. It is defending the principle of free speech. And that principle, if we dilute it, means that we will not be able to tackle those kinds of backward attitudes. That's the whole point. When the example I give in the book of Skokie, Chicago in the 1970s, when the ACLU stood up for the rights of neo-Nazis, they did that in order to defeat neo-Nazis. It wasn't, they understood that we need the principle of free speech for all as an indivisible liberty, because if we dilute that principle, we will not be able to challenge these reactionary views. That our ability to do that will be seriously hampered. So that's the point. It's a misunderstanding. And the other question you have to ask yourself is, whenever someone says something utterly rebarbative and horrible, the question is not, do we defend what they have said? In other words, do we endorse the substance of what they have said? The question is, do we want the state to have the right to decide what forms of speech are acceptable and what forms are not? In other words, do we want to lay the groundwork for future tyranny? And I think that's a much bigger problem than some nutcase on a street corner shouting homophobic slurs. I think it's much more frightening to empower the state to decide where our freedom begins and ends.
Yeah, because you do also address in the book that just because you have free speech, that doesn't mean that it doesn't come with problems or issues.
It comes with huge issues, and it comes with responsibility. And that's why I always encourage people to think carefully before they speak, to take responsibility for their words, and to choose their words with care, be diligent about it. It is a huge responsibility, but no one's ever denied that. Again, it's not something I've ever denied.
And one of the bits that really interests me in the book is that there's kind of been a bit of a shift in the movement in terms of who's blocking free speech, that it used to sit more on the right, but it's shifted towards the left. Yeah,
it's interesting that, isn't it? I mean, when I was a kid, I mentioned, all of the right-wing tabloids were the ones who were calling for censorship. I remember specifically David Cronenberg's Crash, because when I was a kid, and I think it was the Evening Standard and the Daily Express were trying to ban it, or they had a campaign to try and ban it, and I really wanted to see it. It just made me want to see the film. That was the whole thing. And we had the same thing with Danny Boyle's Train Spotting. You go back before my time to The Last Temptation of Christ by Martin Scorsese, and Last Tango in Paris. I believe there was a campaign to have that banned as well. And then, of course, the Video Nasties scandal in the 1980s, where films like Driller Killer and Evil Dead were removed from stores by the BBFC. You've got the Clean Up TV campaign of the 1960s by Mary Whitehouse. And all of these were right-wing figures. They were conservatives, right? And that makes sense, because part of conservatism, not part of conservatism, but a number of conservatives have this kind of prudish mindset, and they were offended by the material in these things. And they also believed, as Mary Whitehouse most famously did, that the public consumption of mass media entertainment had the impact of corrupting the masses. It was really a mistrust of working class people more than anything. But it's like the idea that the public can be corrupted by the entertainment that they consume. We know that's not true, by the way, because there have been 6 decades into media effects theory which has debunked that. But we now behave as though it is true. The only difference is that the call for censorship of the arts is now coming from the left, or at least the self-proclaimed left, the identitarian left, those who are obsessed with identity politics and believe in intersectionality. And that's a weird shift to have taken place. But those who are calling for certain TV shows to be erased from streaming services, or to be censored, or to have certain scenes cut out of Peep Show and whatever else has been going on, and Little Britain and that kind of thing, their mindset and justification, their philosophical justification, is actually identical to that of Mary Whitehouse, this right-wing theocrat from the 1960s. And it's funny that they don't reflect on that and maybe think that they might be wrong. But as I said before, self-awareness isn't their strong suit.
Do you think there is any justification for any episodes or previous pieces of art within history to be edited or cut in any way? Do you think there is a justification? Okay, I just really interested.
Well, I trust people to understand that things were made in different time periods and are therefore are subject to different ideas and values. I mean, it's a no-brainer. You can even teach a child that. Like, it's not hard. You don't just purge everything in the past. When I was at school, we taught, one of the first Shakespeare plays that we were taught was The Taming of the Shrew. Well, I mean, look at Catherine's last speech of Taming of the Shrew, where she talks about how ashamed she is. I'm a woman and I'm ashamed of that women are so feeble, or whatever she says. And you just think, okay, you could read that as a deeply misogynistic passage, and that's an example of Shakespeare endorsing misogyny. But even young children at the time when we looked at that play, I think I must have been 11, understood that this was written 400 years ago, and therefore they thought about things differently than we do. And if an 11-year-old can understand it, then adults certainly should be able to.
So is that the biggest blocker to free speech at the moment, is kind of the social justice movement? Would you say that's the biggest thing that's restricting it? Yeah.
I think because it impacts on absolutely everything else. I mean, it's at the heart of big tech censorship, because Silicon Valley is so overtaken and captured by this ideology. It's at the heart of all hate speech regulation, and the reason why hate speech regulation are expanding, but also why no politician has got the gumption to stand up against hate speech legislation, or to say that it ought to be repealed. The social justice movement has escalated over the last 10 or so years, and is responsible for cancel culture in particular. And also, more than that, is responsible for this chilling atmosphere of conformity that we now find ourselves in, where a lot of people are unwilling to express their true opinions because they fear that they will be fired from their jobs or will be harassed online. And we're not talking about racists, Nazis, homophobes, people like that. We're talking about decent people who just happen to disagree with the establishment view. Perhaps they are supportive of Brexit. Perhaps they're sceptical about the values of mass immigration, whatever it might be. These aren't evil people. Gender critical feminists in particular are the ones who are constantly booted off Twitter simply for acknowledging that there is such a thing as biological sex differences. So, and I speak to a lot of people in the media who say they just don't go near that issue. They don't talk about the issue of a perceived conflict between feminism and trans rights, because they know that to do so puts yourself in the lion's den. You just get attacked and harangued online, and you can in fact be arrested, and you can lose your job. And these things are happening. So we are undeniably living in that culture of conformity, and people who deny it are doing so willfully, I believe, because the evidence is too overwhelming. I think that's a good question.
I used a phrase, how people answer how they think they should answer, kind of a social...
The phrase is preference falsification.
Preference falsification, yeah.
This concept of preference falsification, which I cite, I didn't invent the term, I cite it in the book, is this idea of when you basically say the opinion that you think will be most well received, as opposed to what you truly think. And there was an example of this. I was talking to someone who had a mate who was on the panel of Question Time, and he was talking about how they went around the panel saying this opinion. I don't know what the subject was, but afterwards in the green room, they all said to each other, "Did you really think that?" And they all agreed they didn't really believe any of it, and that they just said it because they wanted to get the round of applause from the audience, and they knew that was the only acceptable thing you could say. That's preference falsification. It's very, very common among politicians. And that's why we spend an awful lot of time trying to work out what politicians really think. Wouldn't it be a wonderful world if everyone just said exactly what they believe so we know who we're voting for? That would be fantastic. I just think honesty is so important, just even from a purely self-interested point of view, because if you're being dishonest, it's incredibly self-destructive. It eats away at your soul if you're having to say things that you know not to be true. That's why there's so much frustration at the moment. You know, a lot of the people who contact me and say, I can't get involved in this trans debate because I can't say what I truly think, or if I do get involved, I'll be compelled to say what I really think. And I'm saying to them, you know, actually, this is a really liberating thing, to just be honest and respect other people enough to disagree, and respect that they'll be able to disagree with you politely. Of course, a lot of people can't, but there are sufficient numbers of people who want to have the debate.
Yeah, can you understand why some people fear treading that line? Because, you know, you're talking about people's livelihood or jobs on the line. If someone can be sacked for a misplaced comment, you can understand the concern.
I get it 100%. And you know, it's very easy for me to say because I'm not going to get sacked. I don't have a boss. My job depends on me saying what I think. So it's all very well me standing here and saying, oh, you should be braver. You should say what you think. I'm not the one who's going to get fired. So I do accept that criticism, and I think it's a legitimate criticism. I don't think it's hypocritical of me, because I still think that the principle is right, that we all need to be a little bit braver, and we all need to accept that some of us are going to fall, but there will be a tipping point. This doesn't go away. Here's the point. If we don't stand up against it, if we don't start speaking our minds, it doesn't go away, it just wins. And we end up in a society where everyone is just following an accepted script. And that's not a society I want to live in. I don't believe it's the kind of society that most people want to live in either. No,
I think that you're right in terms of it will build frustration and you're not being true to yourself as well.
Exactly. It's just, it's utterly dispiriting. It destroys the human soul. I think honesty is so important.
And maybe a final question, Andrew. Where do you hope the book will go? I heard you being interviewed the other day and someone was suggesting it should be a GCSE text because it's fairly readable. You can read it in a few hours. Is that where you hope it would go?
Well, I mean, I deliberately made an effort to make it accessible, and I do believe that the best writing is that which is clear. That's why I fear that a lot of academic writing is just simply bad writing, unless you have clarity, as Anatole France said. Clarity is all, because if you don't have that, then really it's bad writing and obscurantist writing, and you need to be able to express your views and persuade people. Part of rhetoric, I mean, the great thing, you know, my background is in Renaissance studies. Well, of course, there were manuals. Abraham France, for instance, there were manuals about rhetoric. Shakespeare is a great practitioner of rhetoric. It's about the art of persuasion. That's why his characters are able to change the minds of people in just like 100 lines or so, you know? And I think that's the key, an awareness that it's not just enough to have good ideas, you have to be able to express them well. And I feel that, well, that's what I attempted to do with this book. I didn't want to alienate anyone. I would be thrilled if young people read it, because young people, of course, are the most open-minded of all, and they are yet to be persuaded on all sorts of however much arrogance they have, teenage arrogance, all this certainty. Bottom line is that the young people that I've had interactions with all are open to be challenged. Most of them are, and I would love that. I think that's probably the best home for it, actually. A book that can explain the issues, go through the basic misconceptions that are so commonplace, and you know, it's a kind of, I suppose it's my humble contribution towards that debate, and in the hope that maybe the next generation will be more capable of critical thinking than my generation, because I just see failure across the board when it comes to my peers, that all they can do when it comes to argument is throw insults or misrepresent the other person's views, and I'm afraid it's just not good enough. So I think the hope lies with the young.
And I really agree with that. Those that sit on the fence of the free speech movement, I think that's who it would really appeal to in particular.
Which is most people.
Yeah.
So I mean, I would like to think that's the case. So yeah, I do hope people give it a try. And as you say, it's a short book. You can read it in a couple of hours. Why not?
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. And could you just remind us before you go again, you said Titania is going onto the stage. Is that right? When's that due for?
Well, I mean, as I say, that we did have a show that was at the Edinburgh Fringe, and it was due to go on last March and then this March. And so now it is being postponed to September, and it's probably going to be on sale in a few days' time. That's the hope. So just look out, and I will be tweeting about it, and I'm pretty sure Titania will be tweeting about it. But yeah, come along. It should be fun.
Great. And people can add you on Twitter as Andrew or Titania. Does it annoy you Titania has a lot more followers than you, Andrew?
Yeah, I'm absolutely seething with rage that I've created a persona that's far more well-known than I am. No, it's fine. It's good. I don't like the idea of fame. I don't want to be well-known. I'm more than happy that she's more well-known than me.
Thank you so much for your time today, Andrew. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for The Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast. If you would like to contact the show or be interviewed, then please email the sociologyshowpodcast@gmail.com.